This year marks the 50th anniversary of what was known as Freedom Summer. It was a time when blatant racism in the South kept African Americans from voting. About 1,000 college students from across the country, including Indiana, traveled south, lived in the homes of African Americans, and made it their mission that summer to help register black voters.
You had a period of 100 years of rigid racial segregation, known as the Jim Crow era. Blacks were prescribed in every way. They got inferior education, inferior, if any, health care. They had no job opportunities, and the races were rigidly separated in all phases of human activity. Beginning in the 1950s and later on with the sit-ins and the freedom rides, why young activists and older local leaders decided to do something about it. And in Mississippi, this began really in the summer of 1961 in a place called Macomb, Mississippi. It spread throughout the state, and they made some progress. However, the opposition was monolithic in the states. You had the White Citizens Council, known as the Uptown Ku Klux Klan. You had a revival of the old Ku Klux Klan. You had the State Sovereignty Commission, a spy agency. So as a result, movement people were stymied. They had no opportunity to organize in their communities without people being put in jail, losing their jobs, or shot. So the decision was made in the winter of 1963-64 to invite upwards of 1,000 college students, Northerners. It was assumed most of them would be white. There were few black college students at the time, and they couldn't afford to come down. But the idea was to attract the attention of the country, and particularly the federal government. They felt that if by bringing a large number of students, particularly prominent white people, the sons and daughters of congressmen among them, why the nation would pay attention, and maybe, just maybe, persuade a reluctant federal government to enforce the U.S. Constitution in the Magnolia State.
Black voters were intimidated when attempting to register. Dittmer says the requirements to register were arbitrary. There was a $2 annual poll tax that was cumulative, plus black voters had to pass a test.
Well, the registrar was the sole judge of whether you passed or not. So you had the phenomenon of registrars with a third-grade education turning down black PhDs because they did not interpret a very difficult section of the state Constitution to the registrar's liking.
Theron C. Lind, circuit clerk and voting registrar of Forest County, Mississippi, is one of the most powerful men in America. He and the 81 other county registrars in Mississippi have the power under state law to decide who can and who cannot vote.
I was part of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, and in '64 we all were gearing up for the summer. We were doing the training for the students coming from the East Coast, West Coast, getting ready to go into Mississippi for the VEP project, the Voters Project. I was also coordinator for SNCC for all of the colleges. I go to all the various colleges throughout the South and the coast to recruit students to be participants in the summer project, number one. Number two, to be participants in their local communities in some protests. We who were the black experience would go in, and a lot of times the black population who lived in those areas, many of them wanted to vote, but they were afraid, and the laws were so stringent. And the whites who would go into those communities, they were more threatened by the system, because here you come down here and you shouldn't be down here. So it was ugly. It was ugly.
The volunteers went through training in Oxford, Ohio. They were taught to react non-violently if confronted, and if arrested, never to leave a jail alone when released.
At the beginning of the second week of the training session, a group had come back to Mississippi, and three of the workers, two from the Congress of Racial Equality, Mickey Schwerner, who was white, and James Chaney, who were black, went to investigate a church, a black church that had been bombed by the Klan, and they took with them a volunteer fresh from the orientation session, Andrew Goodman. The three of them were arrested in Philadelphia, Mississippi, in Neshoba County. They were taken to jail, they were released, and then they disappeared. And for most of the summer, there was no word on them. Finally, in August, the FBI had an informant who told them that they had been murdered and their bodies put deep in an earthen dam in rural Mississippi. Well, from the beginning, that story was page one all over the world. It had a major impact on focusing attention on Mississippi. And of course, if you're a volunteer coming down not knowing what to expect, to be faced squarely with the possibility that you too could die was a very sobering experience.
You always knew you better get where you're supposed to be before the sun goes down. And Yazoo City was such a city. If you didn't, you would come up missing. You also had to protect the families, because some of the families were very nice and they're trying to help, but they would receive the repercussions of that. For me, after 62, 63, 64, hitting 65, you started having battle fatigue. So it was time for me to step out and regroup and change. And what I ended up doing was just finishing my education, then started doing work for United Negro College Fund and recruiting back in all of those areas.